Well, good morning, everybody, to the Mississippi Alliance of Nonprofit and Philanthropy's Executive Director Roundtable. We are very, very happy to have you here today for this incredibly important conversation. We at the Alliance are in the business of building capacity and supporting nonprofits and philanthropies as they engage in their daily work to support our community and our citizens and the state. And part of that, and networking and bringing people together, and part of that work is ensuring that we are creating a brave and safe space for important conversations. Nobody has all the answers, but we hope that together we can start to have some honest, authentic conversations around issues that truly do matter and impact not only our leaders around the state, but all citizens. And so we thank you for taking the time out of a very busy and rainy and hopefully not too windy Wednesday morning so that we can come together and share some wonderful knowledge and experiences. Just to give you a little bit of framing for how this is going to go today, we have four amazing panelists who are here with us. And they will be introduced in just a moment. After I finish, I'm going to introduce Vaughn Gordon, our amazing moderator for the day, and then we will have a rich, wonderful discussion. I will ask that during the initial part of our conversation, if you will turn off your webcams and make sure that you mute yourself, so that way the focus can really be on our roundtable. But that if you have comments or questions, feel free to pop those in the chat as we're going through the roundtable discussion. We will make sure that we keep track of those and monitor them. So that way, at the end, we can spend about 20 minutes having a really robust discussion. So we are absolutely looking forward to hearing your voices and hearing your perspectives and getting the feedback of our presenters today. And again, we'll stop about halfway through and just remind you to do that. But we thank you for assisting us in that. I think with that, we will go ahead and get the ball rolling. So let me introduce you to Vaughn Gordon. Vaughn is a friend of mine. We have known each other for a few years now. And, you know, I gotta say, people talk about Mississippi shortcomings all the time, but I promise you, we are not short on amazing, incredibly talented people doing incredible work. And Vaughn is one of those men. He is an incredible leader, an incredible friend, and an incredible person engaging in this work to support Mississippians and to really ensure that we and all Mississippians, particularly children, are able to reach their dreams and achieve success. So a little bit about Vaughn. Vaughn is passionate about equipping youth to build stronger communities through education, empowerment, and dialogue. He is the Youth Engagement Manager for the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation, which aims to create spaces for interracial, multicultural dialogue and promote equity and inclusion for all communities. He has also worked in restaurant operations, business development. Vaughn has served on boards of the Mississippi Statewide After School Network, the Refill Jackson Initiative, Cure Sickle Cell Foundation, and Operation Shoestring. He's very bored, has nothing else to do, so if you need him to help you with the project, just email him. He'll be happy to help you out, I'm sure. In addition to that, he's attended the University of Mississippi and is a proud husband, father of 3 amazing girls, a caretaker for a dachshund Feist mix named Ginger Snap. So Vaughn, if Ginger Snap happens to walk in, I'm not saying that we wouldn't love a cameo, but thank you, Vaughn, for taking the time to be here today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our other panelists and get the ball rolling.
So we have a, thank you very much, Dave. Ginger is wrecking shop on my wife's 5th grade class right now. Her bark keeps the class on its P's and Q's. So hopefully she won't come in on us. Thank you, Dave. Thank you to the Alliance for seizing the opportunity to allow us to have this conversation. I think that this has the potential to be a really rich conversation. I want to value everyone's time, but I also want to get the most out of it. So I'm actually going to shift the challenge a little bit to our panelists, Kai Harris, Richmond, Vincent, and Ira Murray, to introduce themselves. I'm going to ask them to do it in what might be a unique way for some of you. Before I get started with them, let me just thank all of those who joined in. We have high expectations for each other. The men who are here. Most of us have not known each other well, but in preparation for today, I have grown to really value who these men are, where they are, and the really important work they're doing. But their stories are deep and rich, and there's some incredible details in there. So if you gentlemen don't mind, I'd like to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourselves. And if you can, tell us the story of where you came from and your journey to where you are now. That is certainly a mix of the professional, but also a little bit of the personal that affects how you show up every day. So, Kai, if you don't mind, um, would you start us off? Tell us kind of who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about your story to get to the position of leadership where you are now.
Sure, I'll do my best, and if I leave something out, you can follow up and ask me. But first off, good morning to everyone that's out there. There's some faces behind these little initial circles that I'm seeing. So I appreciate y'all for being here this morning. My name is Kai Harris. I am not a Mississippi native, but I like to say Mississippi is where I found myself as a man, as a professional, and as an advocate. I'm originally from Atlanta, although my roots actually trace back to Charleston, Mississippi. That's where my grandparents are from. But I grew up on the south side of Atlanta. I attended Title I public schools there my whole life. Grew up in a single mother household. Found my way to Iowa as a college student. That was my first taste of a rural community. And attended a small liberal arts college called Goodwill College, if anybody's familiar with that. From there, found my way to Mississippi as a Teach for America corps member, and taught in Greenwood, Mississippi at the mighty Amanda Elsie High School. If anybody's familiar with the G-Wood, shout out to y'all. Fell in love with Mississippi, fell in love with education, and knew that empowering young Black folks who look like me, who come from similar backgrounds as I did, was what I was meant to do for the rest of my career. But was also not interested in having conversations with students about where they put commas in essays, and was much more interested in talking about real life stuff in terms of, how to really live out your best life for yourself, for your family, and for your community. And so that led me to an after-school youth leadership program called the Sunflower County Freedom Project, which is modeled after the Mississippi Freedom Schools of 1964. And it's all about using the history of Mississippi, using the history of the Black struggle for liberation to empower young people with a toolkit to be leaders, to be artists, to be activists, and to sort of lead our communities, our state, and our country forward for the future. So I worked there and led college access work for a few years, led experiential learning work for a few years. And then over time, the Freedom Project family started to expand. There were other freedom projects opening up across the state. And so now we have 3, one in Sunflower County, one in Meridian, and one in Rosedale. And at that point, the founders and the leadership of the organization decided that it would make sense to found the Freedom Project Network which is the umbrella organization that oversees the growth and sustainability of all Freedom Project programs. And I was tapped to be the leader of that organization. So that's what brings me to this space. But ultimately, I'm just a young brother who loves talking about my students and their brilliance and not putting all of the attention on myself. And that's just what I have the pleasure of doing in this elevated platform, is just being the face and the voice of our kids. And that's what I'm about.
Thank you very much, Kai. Much better job than I could have done. Richmond, would you take the stage next in telling us a little bit of the story of who you are and where you come from and kind of how you ended up doing such awesome work on the Mississippi Gulf Coast?
Outstanding. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that, Vaughn and Kai. Excellent. Young brother, you keep going. Love it. And then also Ira. I also want to thank, I have a couple board members on the call this morning. So thank you for joining us this morning. And also my lovely wife is joining today, so I better behave and I'll have good behavior. But my name's Richmond Vincent. I'm the president and CEO of Goodwill in South Mississippi, located here in Gulfport. We strive to eliminate poverty here in Mississippi, and we do it by empowering individuals, strengthening families, and building strong communities. So how I got here today, really, my parents, father from Talladega, Alabama, mother from Jackson, Mississippi, so a lot of Southern roots, but they moved to the north, Minneapolis, Minnesota, thinking that that was going to be the pinnacle of progress. And I'll tell you, many of you know, Minneapolis right now is the epicenter of a lot of the unrest that's going on in our community right now with George Floyd. That happened in Minneapolis. So I was born in Minneapolis, and I know exactly where George lost his life. I know exactly where that is. Frequent that area on many occasions. So it really brought things home to me seeing that. But I was born and raised in Minneapolis. For me, a lot of what today started when I was in 6th grade. The desegregation of public schools had not occurred in Minneapolis in the late 70s, the mid to late 70s. And so my 6th grade year, I was bused 30 minutes outside my community. I grew up, K through 5th grade with a mixed mixed group of individuals in our school system. But then in 6th grade, the desegregation was enforced. And so I was bused 30 minutes out. And I can tell you, heading to that school, and we're driving on the bus, and all of a sudden, bricks, oranges, other kinds of fruit, things are hitting our bus. And I'm wondering, like, wow, is it raining something? Is this a weird way in this part of town? And then we look outside, and it was adults yelling and screaming at us, telling us to go back, using derogatory words and things of that nature. And so that, to me, is when I really had to grow up and really understand, my role, my place, and my role in society. So went through that, went through high school. I was blessed. I was a student athlete. I was recruited and went to Arizona State University, played football there. I played 4 years there in football. Then I bounced around for several years trying to make it in the NFL. Then it came to a point where I realized I wasn't getting calls anymore. So I went back to school, focused on my education, got my degree in political science, and then also got my master's degree. And then I went into the private sector and spent several years there, most notably in banking. So I have a pretty good background in banking. So you'll hear me talk a lot about finances and how having financial literacy is such an empowering position. And then I was approached by the chairman of the board of the Goodwill in Phoenix. And he said, hey, Richmond, there's a great opportunity for you to go to work for Goodwill. And at the time, guys, I had never, I had sat on boards, never worked at a nonprofit before. And so I said, well, I'm not sure if I want to work for a nonprofit, because in my mind, I'm thinking about the traditional nonprofit, right? You're living by a bootstring, you're darn near volunteering, because everyone assumes that if I work for a nonprofit, I don't earn an income. I do it, obviously you love it, but then you do it for free. And so, but he explained to me, no, we're a social enterprise, so a little bit different than traditional charity, that we are a social enterprise. So we have a mission foundation, but we support it through operational and running an operating business. And it was retail stores and other entrepreneurial businesses for the organization. So I joined the organization, and I was there for 7 years, went from being a director all the way to being a senior vice president. And then I saw the opportunity to come to Mississippi and take on the CEO role here. And I'll tell you, it was exhilarating, but it was also to some extent an unknown, because I got calls from white CEOs in Goodwill. I got calls from all kinds of folks saying, are you sure you want to go to Mississippi, brother? Are you sure? And I said, what do you mean? We fear for your life. And so even my parents were like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to go to Mississippi? And I told them, if I can make it in Minneapolis, I can make it in Mississippi. And so, I was blessed. I interviewed, I had a great board, and that was the primary reason why I chose to come to Mississippi, is because the board, and as a CEO, you learn it's about your board. If you have a good board, you're going to have a great tenure. If you don't, and you're in conflict, it's going to be brutal. So it was a great board. And so I came down here in 2017. I really enjoyed being here on the coast. It's great being by water, because coming from Phoenix, the desert, there was no water. And the water you did see was man-made. So somebody just took some water out of the sink and threw it in a backyard and said they got a lake. No, it's not. That's not a lake. And so coming here, being by the water, was great. I've been treated very well since I've been here. And so for me, I like it here. I like being at Goodwill. Here on the coast, we're not by Jackson, but man, we have some amazing leaders here on the coast, and we're doing some amazing work. So for me, guys, everything for me has led me to here, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation. And hopefully from this conversation, we can talk about how do we begin to collaborate collectively and begin to support one another versus being independent organizations in this community. So Vaughn, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to introduce myself, and that is Richmond Vincent.
Thank you very much, Richmond. Thank you very much, and welcome home. Let your mom know if nothing else, we got your back. Ira, how about you?
Great. Well, thank you. Good morning to everybody. Thanks for having me. Vaughn, thanks for the work that you're doing on this. Kai and Vincent and Richmond, I'm just happy to be on this panel. Not so happy I'm going third on this question, having to follow these two brothers up, but I'll give it a try. So yes, I am Ira Murray. I am originally from Columbia, South Carolina. So like Kai and Richmond, I am not a native Mississippian. That wasn't planned for the call. It's just kind of how it worked. But being from South Carolina is not that big of a difference from Mississippi, to be quite honest with you. And so for me, my journey to this point, I really trace it back to my senior year of high school. One of my best friends growing up, and I don't tell the story that often because it's a little emotional for me still to this day. But one of my best friends growing up, he was probably the smartest kid I knew growing up. Young brother, he had over 1,300 on his SAT. He had scholarship offers all over the place. Well, he and I, our senior years of high school, decided that we were both going to go to the same college. We were both going to go to Florida A&M University. And so that was the plan. We both got accepted. We both got scholarships. We were going to be roommates, and we were going to do that together. But he had an issue. He liked to smoke. He started off smoking cigarettes, and then he started smoking marijuana, and he liked to smoke at school. So that was the issue. So eventually he got removed from our school, and he got put into what we called back then an alternative school. But still had scholarship offers. He was still on his way. So the weekend of Easter,
our senior year of high school. I'm 18, he's 17. I'm in my room. I'm just kind of just chilling, and I get a call from one of my other best friends. He said, "Man, have you seen the news?" I said, "No, I haven't seen the news." He was like, "Steve," who's the friend I was talking about, I said, "Steve's on the news." Well, you know, where I'm from and where a lot of people are from, you on the news, that's usually not a good thing. So I'm saying, well, what's going on? He said, "I think Steve just got killed." And so I'm watching the news, I'm calling around, and it finds out that, you know, Steve, who is a scholar, who is got a full ride to college, wanted to be a doctor, ends up getting killed while he was trying, and another friend of ours were trying to rob a fast food restaurant. 17 years old, right? And so, you know, I think about that story because that was, to me, with the first moment where, like, someone very close to me, who had a lot of potential, a young brother, died tragically, you know. And so, you know, I went on to school. You know, I thought, okay, I'm going to go to school, get a business degree, you know, maybe go into banking like Richmond and go make a little bit of money, you know, and I'm just going to. By the second year of my time at Florida A&M, I couldn't get what happened to Steve out of my head. And so I decided to change course. I still got my business degree, but I decided to change course. I decided, you know what, I want to make a career out of helping people because I don't want that story to keep happening in communities where I'm living. So after I got my business degree, I went to Vanderbilt to get a master's degree. Now, my master's on my resume says education because that's where I was. The degree itself is actually in human, organizational, and community development. So it's a degree that really was centered on, one, understanding how people development. It was kind of framed within a community psychology framework. So you understand how people develop. You understand then how organizations can develop. And then you take that and then you say, okay, now this is how we center community around all of that, right? So these three different layers of how we build out people and communities. So I got that degree, spent 3 years in Nashville. And then I had the opportunity to enter the United Way network through a fellowship that they had at the time. It was a national fellowship program. Well, my placement was in Jackson, Mississippi. So I remember the call, the congratulation call. They said, hey, you know, congratulations, we selected you, just one thing. And I'm like, okay, what is this one thing? And they were like, do you mind moving to Mississippi? I was like, you know what, I will go anywhere that y'all send me because I really want to do this work. So much like Vincent, like Richmond, you know, my family was saying, why are you moving to Mississippi? Like, really, why are you moving to Mississippi? And I told them, well, y'all are in South Carolina. What difference do you think there's a big difference between Mississippi and South Carolina? I don't. And so that began my career here at this United Way. I spent the first 9 years here working on community impact programs and initiatives. One of the big things we were doing was education, partnering primarily with Jackson Public Schools and Canton Public Schools. And one of the things that just really bothered me about the condition I was seeing all these young brothers not make it. And no matter how hard the school tried, the teachers, the administrators, a lot of these young brothers just weren't making it. And it was at a point where only about 27% of Black males were graduating in 4 years from JPS. Like 1 out of every 4 graduated, not didn't graduate, graduated. So for me, I felt like I need to get a better understanding of what's going on from a system standpoint, a policy standpoint, from a teaching and learning standpoint, like what's going on. So I left to go to Pittsburgh to get a graduate degree. I got my doctoral degree in urban education. I did a lot of research and writing and scholarship. Even to this day, I still do it on race and education, particularly in urban cities. I thought that I had left Mississippi in the rear view. I felt like, you know, I'm gonna get a job as a professor and kind of just do this work from that standpoint. But the opportunity when I was finishing my degree to come back and to take on this work in Jackson just really drew me back. And so I felt like it was a calling. I felt like it all kind of came together at that point in time for a reason. And so I found myself back here at United Way as president and CEO, now trying to recenter some of the work that we're doing to focus on these gaps and opportunities that we see in communities. You know, one of my mentors, Richmond, always likes to say, there's not an achievement gap, there are opportunity gaps. And that's what we're really seeing. And so that's what we're really trying to recenter our work, not just education, but also economic mobility and health.
Wow. I mean, like, yeah, snaps. So I'm from Moorhead, Mississippi, little bitty town in Sunflower County. My mother had been 16 2 days when I was born. So one of the things that, as I got older, I became aware of was what the statistics said about what my future would likely be. And so being here, I've always felt like my grandfather used to tell me when I was younger that an oak tree is an acorn that persevered. And I've always wanted to be a force for good and make sure that other acorns could survive. But I've always been a Black man. I really like to hear from each of you why that is important for where you are and the work that you're doing. Why does that part of your identity, why does it matter so much? And either of you who wants to go can jump at that question. There's a lot, you know, there are stereotypes that you walk into spaces and people feel they know you before you get there. So I know that it impacts us in many ways. I'd just like to know what it means to you, what it represents for you to be a Black male in the spaces that you occupy. Kai, your eyebrows went up. Let me hear what you think about that.
Okay, I'll give Ira a break because he just blessed us with all that he shared about his journey. What does it mean to me? I mean, well, obviously, representation is critical. You can't be what you can't see, right? And so I think for me, just first off, just knowing that like the impact that seeing Black male leaders has had on my life. So, you know, when I was in high school, I participated in the after school youth leadership program, very similar to the organization that I'm a part of now. It was, you know, 4 Black boys led by Black male professionals. And having them as mentors and role models in my life, you know, is a huge part of my success today. And so I think, and being in a space with brothers like Ira and Richmond, you know, is inspiring to me right now for the you know, the stage that I am in my journey. So I think being able to be that sort of vision for someone, and I think, you know, also especially for me specifically, you know, I work on behalf of Mississippi's youth, and so I think for me, oftentimes when you think specifically about education, you see organizations who in their mission statements or in their approach is all about empowering Black and brown kids and Black and brown communities, but the people who are at the decision-making table don't look like any of the kids that they're serving. And so for me, I think I take it very personal to, you know, that I share the identity of the students who our organization serves, and that person who is the most senior leader for the organization has that sort of lens and that sort of perspective, and that, you know, I deserve a seat at the table, and that we're honestly doing a disservice to our students if my perspective is not at the table when we're making decisions that directly impact kids, families, and communities that look like. And then I think another thing for me specifically, it's like when I think about the few Black men in leadership who you do see, you know, they tend to fit this certain type, right? typically, you know, well off in their careers. You know, the brothers, they got they're well advanced in their education. You know, they're super clean cut. They're more eloquent than everybody else in the room. But a lot of brothers don't resonate with that. Like, a lot of brothers don't see themselves. And so they then like don't think that that's possible for them. So for me, you know, knowing that the young brother with locks down his back who loves hip hop music and, you know, who might not be the best speaker in the room, but who is deeply passionate about the work, that if he can see me and feel inspired and see that like this being in this sort of leadership position is possible, then I think it's powerful. And it's a blessing for me to be that image. So that's what's important.
Awesome. So Richmond, your story, the story you shared in introducing yourself, you know, experiencing the integration of schools, we know that at very, unfortunately, when you learn really critical things about how people see you and your identity, in a really high stress environment, right? Or really a tragic experience, you can't run away from it. Not, you didn't say anything to suggest you ever tried, but what has it meant for you to be a Black man in the spaces that you've occupied when you got to learn at a very early age that it meant something to society for you to be a Black man?
Absolutely. And, you know, let me first start off, I am proud as hell to be a Black man. So let me start off with that. You know, for me, you know, I've got a good dose of history, not only just from that experience in school, but also from my parents and my family. So I got a good dose of history. And my responsibility, you know, as a Black man, to bring forward and continue the progress that my forefathers had achieved. And so, you know, I'll tell you, you know, growing up, so, you know, going through high school, hearing teachers tell me, you're never going to be anything but an athlete. Just focus on that because you can't do anything else. They actually said it to me. I mean, you've heard those kind of comments today. We're hearing it now from certain folks, but, you know, they told me that. And so, you know, but they didn't tell the other players who were not Black that same thing. They said, oh, wow, you can go to college, you know, you can go to Ivy League, you can go here, you can become, you know, these amazing occupations. And so, you know, I was blessed because I had a father who said, no, you're gonna be better than that. And not to mention, son, you're the oldest of 4 siblings. Their success is measured by you. It's your responsibility to make sure that you show your brothers and sisters that they can achieve whatever they want to. And so for me, I believe I've always carried that responsibility for my siblings and for other Black men to say, you know what? In situations, I may be the first, but I'm sure in the heck not going to be the last. And so to me, my whole journey has always been, I may be first, but who else can I bring along to join me on this journey? Because, you know, growing up, man, you know, my dad, you know, and I tell folks all the time, the most conservative brothers you will meet is a Southern Black Baptist. I mean, they are conservative, and especially when you were the oldest son, man, you go through, I went through this boot camp day after day because his expectation was, it's your job to make sure your brothers and sisters succeed. It's your job to make sure that other Black folks in the organizations or in your community succeed. If they don't, that's on you. And that's how I was raised. And so for me, you know, throughout this process, and even coming to the position I'm in today, is I am very cognizant that, guys, if I make a mistake, it just doesn't impact Richmond. It impacts Vaughn, it impacts Kai, it impacts Ira, and any other African-American male who is looking to be in this position. And so, you know, for me, I don't have that room for error. So that's why it's so important for me to perform exceed, not just perform, not be just okay, but exceed and be outstanding and be amazing. And it's also important to show folks who are not Black that, you know what? You know, I see all these images on the media and on the news that Black men are more than just that. I'm more than just being an athlete, right? You know, I can be a very, very successful and very, very impactful leader in his community for not just Black folks, but for all folks. And so I think that's something that's important to me. But you know, I carry, you know, being, you know, a Black man in this country very close to my vest, and especially being here in Mississippi, because you know, I hear about how poorly we perform in every single metric. We don't have to. We don't have to. And to me, it's going to be up to all leaders, and especially us Black leaders, to really push the needle forward to bring folks to a point where we don't have 20% poverty rate in Mississippi anymore. We don't have the lowest graduation rates in the country anymore. And so for me, guys, being here is just so important. But I really, really, you know, embrace my role as, you know, carrying myself in a manner that is respectful to all Black men and then of all leaders in this community.
Ira, when I have told audiences for years and friends of mine that one of the best things I learned about myself at a young age was that I was a Black man, that there was a style to that. There was a rich history of overcoming and being amazing, whether it's Dr. King or, you know, at the time being Carson. Like, there were great examples out there. I was blessed by it. But I've also shared that it was one of the worst things that ever happened to me, learning that that's who I was, in part because of some of the things Richmond mentioned. I had to carry all of these burdens of unfair, grossly unfair expectations of others. So I know that there's a mix there, and perhaps everyone doesn't see it the way I do in that. But what has it meant for you to be a Black man in the spaces that you've been in and where you are now? And I've got a follow-up question for you because of your expertise. But what's it meant for you?
Yeah, so like, you know, everyone else on this call, you know, I'm unapologetically Black in every space I'm in. I was really fortunate that, you know, my father, who I mean, did a tremendous job. He had all boys. I don't have any sisters. He did a tremendous job raising all three of us. And I was very fortunate that my father, from the earliest memory I have, always gave us great examples of Black men, right? Whether it was himself, his friends, the other Black men in our church growing up, the images we had in our house, the books on the shelf, you know, that I would later on go on to read, you know, all these things were really reinforcing. So it made me feel good about who I was, coming up in an era where we were taught not to feel good about who we were. You know, I grew up in, you know, the 80s. You know, we were taught in the 80s that we were all either going to be on crack, or we were going to be dealing crack, or we were going to die from someone who was on crack.
Yep.
And that's what they told us. But I never believed it because I knew the alternative. But unfortunately, a lot of my friends didn't have that. So for me in this space now, you know, it's really all about, Takai and Richmond's point, it's about representation first and foremost. You know, that people the young Black men and young Black girls as well, you know, and women can see us in these positions where not only are we successful professionally, but we're actively caring for other people, because Black men aren't supposed to be nurturers. Black men aren't supposed to be healers. Black men aren't supposed to care about their communities. We're supposed to go out and get ours. We're supposed to care about money. We're supposed to care about, you know, being physically dominant. You know, we're supposed to reach for these things that tear us away from our families. because that's how we were bred to be. Well, no, that's not what it is. You know, I want young people to be able to see a fuller view of what Black manhood looks like, that you can be successful, that you can be a Black male with a doctorate degree. You can be a Black male who goes from one sector to another. You can be a Black male that, you know, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you know, you're in a button up and a blazer, and then, you know, the rest of the day and on the weekends you're in sweats and Jordans, you know, because there's no difference, right? You can be that, and this is how you get there. I also think, though, it's really important in these spaces, for me in particular, is that I start to kind of redefine or show really what a broader spectrum of Black manhood is, because there's a lot of conversation right now on social media about how Black men, particularly like heterosexual cisgender Black men, are just problematic. Right? Got this different energy politically, or we're problematic towards our women. I would say our women as in Black women, and cisgender Black males, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just a small number of folks. You know, there's so many of us who are trying to do this work, and a lot of us do it behind the scenes. You know, I know a lot of brothers. Vaughn is one of them, who mentors young people, and it's not always out in the open. Sometimes it's on a phone call. Sometimes it's on a Zoom. Sometimes it's breakfast on a Saturday. But I want people to be able to see that, because Black men are really, really important in not only just advancing Black families, but also this country as a whole. So it's really just about being visible. It's about and also being vocal, because many of the spaces that I occupy, sometimes I'm the only Black male there. Sometimes there may be only 2 or 3 of us there. And knowing that perspective is in the room and being voiced to people who do have access to power or have power themselves is really important, because we want to make sure that the equity and that the work that's being done in our communities is not doing harm to the people we love and care about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you, of those of us on the call, you have spent the most time immersed in the academics of development and studying and researching, as you said. We've all talked about like the fact that you're blessed, you made it, like you got some breaks, you persevered through some stuff, but there are a lot of folks who don't make it. There are a lot of brothers who don't make it to achieve the dreams they set for themselves. And sometimes it's because of the pressures that I kind of spoke to a little bit, and you guys have articulated in different ways. Can you talk a little bit about, from a developmental standpoint, for us, we'll certainly learn, but the audience as well, for how destructive the forces of identity can be? I think specifically about stereotype threat as an idea like this, going into spaces more afraid that you're going to validate a stereotype in someone's mind than you are focused on getting done the work that you're there to do. It's very costly. Can you speak a little bit about that developmental piece?
Yeah. So young kids, like as early as 2-3 years old, and this is all with researchers, identify a race. Like they know, like, I'm a different color than my friend, right? Who I'm Black, my friend's white, we're different colors, right? They don't necessarily make meaning of it. They just identify it. They can see it, right? So at an early age, we start to make meaning of those things based on primarily what our primary caregivers, how they make meaning of it. So if I'm in a home, if I'm a Black male and I'm a young child, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, I'm learning about myself and what being a Black child means based on who my primary caregivers are, primarily. So if they're reinforcing positive images, if they're giving me positive messages, if they're teaching me about who I am in a very positive way, I'm going to have more of a positive identity as I develop younger, right? Once we get into adolescence, then that identity development begins to shift a little bit, right? So up to then, it's primarily your family, your primary caregivers, your parents, etc. Once you become an adolescent, now you start to kind of get away from that, and it becomes more about your peer groups and you as an individual. So if I don't have that strong foundation as a kid, when I get into adolescence, now I'm really going to pick up my identity development based on what I'm around, or who I'm around, my peers, etc. If my peers are engaging in destructive behavior, if my peers think a certain way about them, if they feel like they have limitations based on being in a Black body, I'm more likely then to start adopting that view as I develop. And that tends to carry on with you through the rest of your life. I mean, that period of adolescence really is in terms of your identity development, probably the most formative period of your life, right? I mean, just think about it. Think about the music you love to this day. Most of the music that really resonates you is probably music you heard during the adolescence period. The music you like. I'm like a mid-90s hip hop guy, right? Why? Because that's when I was a teenager. You know, and that's what resonates, right? So when you think about the developmental piece, it is so important, number one, to just reinforce positive images in the home with young Black children, boys and girls, so that they develop a positive sense of themselves. And then once they get to late elementary, into middle school and high school, you know, make sure they're in environments where that's being mutually reinforced with their peers, because that's really going to help them as they move forward just in terms of just an identity development piece. Now, the other stuff in terms of structural racism and things like that, you know, are a whole nother conversation. But if you can't, you know, it's like when you're on an airplane and they tell you before you can take care of someone else, you have to take care of yourself. You got to put your mask on before you can help out the next person. That's what we have to do in terms of our development as Black children and Black people. We got to take care and make sure we're right internally first before we can then go out and help other people become whole.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you very much for that. And I recognize that you were just prepared to answer that, like I knew you would be. I appreciate that. I asked that question because both the positive elements, the things that you drew strength from, and the challenges that you face, have all kind of brought you to a place. What I'd like to know from each of you now, and Richmond, I'd like you to answer this question first. How has this informed how you lead and how you imagine leadership in your organization and in the spaces you occupy? How does it inform that? And how does it inform how you see the people you serve beyond those who work for you or work under your leadership?
Wow. You know, I think for me, it's made me more cognizant of the environment that I'm creating. And, you know, I'll tell you a story. So when I first came here to Goodwill, my senior staff, I had 5 vice presidents, and they all were white females. And so one of them pulled me aside and said, "Mr. Vincent, are you going to fire all of us and then bring in all Black folks?" And I said, you know, and I said, "Why would I do that?" They couldn't answer, but I understood what she was getting at, because that's what would happen in a traditional environment if it was the other way around, right? And so I said, "No, I am not." Okay. And so, you know, I think in my spaces, it's really appreciating diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my response to them would have been, if I had an all Black staff, but yet my community represented a mixed community, I should have the emotional intelligence to ask the question, why don't I have representation that reflects my community? And so for me, you know, that's to answer your question, to me, that's the essence of it. And that to me is what I want to bring to this organization and to others, is that, you know, we lead all folks. We lead every single person in this community. And that as a Black man, I can lead white folks just as well as I can lead Black employees. And, you know, I have a unique employee base, because we have about 350 employees. and it's probably 60-40 white folks. And so, you know, as I'm talking to the team, although we're of different colors, we have the same issues. The same issues. And so, you know, for me, for them to hear from me and to follow a black man, because I had someone say to me, ask me, say, Richmond, do the white people even listen to you at the job? Do they do their own things and not even listen to you? And I says, no, they listen. They listen. And so, you know, Vaughn, I just would just end with, there is just this big misconception on black men cannot lead. And, you know, for me, I've experienced it, whether it's in sports, wanting to be a coach, could not be. Yet the coach's son was a coach, and he didn't have any talent, didn't even know what the heck was going on, but he was the coach son, so he became a coach. And it's also, you know, just here in this space. And my last story is, you know, we have an annual conference for Goodwill, and we meet, it's about 150 CEOs across the country. And I'm at the conference, and I have a CEO from the South come in and says, Richmond, I better be careful because I don't want you to kick my butt. And I just stopped and I said, what would make you think I'm going to kick your butt? I'm a CEO. Why would I even approach that? But it's just that systemic thinking that it's physical. He's big, right? 6'3", 220. Yeah, so he's going to be physical, and he can't handle me, you know, from a articulate manner. He's going to be physical. And so to me, that's one of the things, you know, when we talk about the stereotypes and systemic racism, those are those things that still follow you. But to me, you know, as leaders, you can't let that interrupt yourself of being a leader, and don't fall for it or jump in and take the bait. So,
Kai or Ira, either one of you who want to kind of take a shot at that question, just how that all that you've had to navigate has prepared how you see leadership in your organizations.
Well, when I think about my leadership style, I think it goes back to a quote that my granny is famous for saying, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, because you should be listening twice as much as you speak. And so that's something that I live by, not only professionally, but personally. And that, like, leadership is not about being the loudest in the room. It's not about me pretending or acting as if I have all the answers and all the solutions and need to make every decision. I think it's about listening. So for me, you know, I try to consider myself as the point guard on the team. And that if I can listen and really sort of think about, you know, what are people's individual strengths and put them in the best position so that we can win collectively as a team, then I've done my job. And I think, you know, specifically for me, again, being an organization where our constituents are Black kids, I think, you know, my role is how can I elevate their voices? So this idea of grassroots leadership, in that it's bottom up, not top down. That the work that I do is a reflection of the needs and the demands of the students and families and communities that we serve. And I believe that's the way it should be. And so for me, it's not about what does Kai think and what I think is right or what I think is the right strategy. It's about sitting back and listening and bringing people together to bring their perspectives on a problem, and then also work together to bring collective solutions. And then we all can do that across organizations, across leadership teams, and that just helps us fare much better as a statewide community and as a nation. So.
Thanks, brother. Ira, you're running a large, important organization. You know, help support a lot of different types of work in the community. How has your navigating but actually, being blessed as you described to be a Black man in the space that you are, but also having to navigate those other developmental the developmental elements and the pressures that come with that. How has it informed how you lead both within the organization and also how you approach leadership of the projects and work that y'all support?
Yeah, that's a great question, Vaughn. Leadership is actually the part of my job I probably struggle with the most. It is probably the part I spend the most time working on, because leadership is so complex, and it's really a continuous, developmental process, right? Like, it's just difficult, right? Sometimes we talk about leadership like, oh, just go do it, right? And it's like, no, leadership is a lot more complex with that, because you're dealing with people. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with people, and dealing with people is never easy. I think for me, one, I see my role as a leader as first and foremost, it's not first and foremost, but part of it is to give voice to things, right? So as a Black male, particularly, it's important that, for those voices who are not in the room that I'm in, that I'm fighting for, that I'm working with in these communities, I have to be willing and able to give voice to their concerns, to their experiences, and to their desires and hopes and aspirations, right? So that's number one. Number two, in terms of internally as a leader, my staff is mostly Black women. It's diverse, but it's mostly Black women. Mm-hmm. And, I'm always thinking about myself, how I'm positioned as a Black man in a leadership position, with mostly Black women as team members, right? And so I'm thinking about, okay, we're going to see a lot of the race equity work primarily from the same standpoint, right? They've got some standpoint differences, but for the most part, in terms of race, we kind of see it very similarly. But then when you put on the gender piece, there are going to be blind spots that I have, right? Because I'm a whole lot closer to the patriarchy than they are, right? But they understand a lot of it a lot better than I do, because they have to, in order to just move and function and be successful. So I find myself listening to the women, particularly the Black women in my organization, a lot, and learning from them, and that's helping me to become a better Black man, because I'm seeing and hearing about the things that I might not necessarily notice that I need to be thinking about as I continue to go into the work, whether I'm dealing with the team, whether I'm dealing with the board, or I'm dealing with the community or foundations or corporate partners, etc. So that position puts me in a position of, one, also leader, but also learner, to Kai's point. And that's a constant interaction that you have to navigate on, that I have to reflect on, and then figure out how that can inform me and my practice to be a lot better than I was yesterday.
So there's some leaders in the audience here. There's some systems leaders in the audience here. I'm curious how you all think the rest of the nonprofit world, funders and organizations out on the front lines doing the hard work, what are some ways that they can be better for Black men, whether in leadership or coming in the door in need of service? What are some ways that you want to challenge people based on your experiences to be better for Black men? That's a heavy question, so I don't want. I'll let y'all volunteer to take that one.
I'll start. We might have to bounce back and forth on this. So this is a complex question. So for me, again, I'm a little bit of a nerd. So my first thing is always, with people, anyone dealing with issues of race and equity, is read up. Read up on it. Read from the perspectives of Black men, scholars, poets, writers, filmmakers. They'll give you a lot of information, and that's kind of a starting point. Also, think about how Black males in general are situated in your work, right? Like, are Black males only recipients of your work? You know, do you have Black males in the organization, on the board, informing the work, giving perspective on the work? You know, we're not a monolithic group by any stretch of the imagination. We're diverse in terms of our thinking, in terms of our politics, in terms of, you know, where we are as society, socioeconomically, sociopolitically. We're a very diverse group. So, you know, thinking about us as a monolith is really going to be detrimental to the kind of work you're doing. But it also, you know, it begins, and I always kind of try to go back to this, because I think as men, particularly Black men, we don't talk about this enough. It begins with love. Like, if we're not genuinely loving each other, we don't genuinely care about the well-being, not just from a, you know, a very practical standpoint, but like, do I really actually care about you? Like, do I actually love you, right? Do I have love for you and anybody in your situation? And when you love people, you do things differently. When you love people, you treat them a certain way. When you love people, you think about them a certain way. And, you know, we have to be comfortable talking about that as nonprofits, as leaders, as Black men in these positions too. We have to be comfortable using that word and really knowing what that means and saying it. You know, I don't say it enough. Personally, I don't say it enough at home sometimes. I don't say it enough in my work sometimes. But at the end of the day, it has to begin with love. And if we don't have that for one another, we don't have that for Black men and Black boys, we can't expect them to have different outcomes than what they've been experiencing.
Yeah. Amen. No, I like jazz hands on that one. Vincent, Kai, what do y'all think? How can organizations be, how can they be better for Black men?
I'll say this. I think you can't acknowledge systemic oppression and the systemic barriers that folks from our communities have to navigate and grapple with without acknowledging the impact of people's lives. And so what I mean by that is, you know, I think it's easy to say, oh, we're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we just can't find the candidates who have the skill set that we're looking for. Or, you know, you know, this brother's great at this program role that he does, but he just doesn't have the skill set that we're looking for to grow and be in a position to lead the organization. And so saying that, just, I think from my perspective and my experience, it just fails to acknowledge access and the lack of access that, you know, those types of candidates may have not had access to. And so thinking about, you know, when you get a candidate and you see that he's got the passion, he's got the potential, but, you know, may not have all the skills right now, invest in it. And, you know, invest in leadership development. And don't charge it to, you know, his work ethic or his preparation, and charge it to that, you know, he just might not have been in position to access these resources to make them polished in the ways that, you know, your organization deems that. And even further, I think a deeper problem with that is addressing these professionalism standards that are rooted in white supremacy. And that, you know, acknowledging that just because, you know, the way I talk or dress or go about different things as a part of me being unapologetically Black, and that looking and feeling different than what is normally seen as professional or crisp or sharp, acknowledging that ultimately that's because those standards and those ideals are rooted in white supremacy and have nothing to do with my ability to do the work and get the job.
So do you not like blue blazers, white shirts, and red ties?
I don't know about a red tie, you know, it's not my color. You know, I like to look good, you know what I'm saying? But I think that, you know, if a brother want to come in with his Jordans and sweats on, and that's what helps him be most productive, then, you know, that doesn't rub me the wrong way. It doesn't mean that he's not taking his work seriously. And that's just a perspective that I have because I got Jordans and sweats in my closet. And so, but if you don't have that, and that your whole life you've been molded to think that like this is what professionalism look like, and that you associate Jordans and sweats with someone being, you know, casual or off their game, then that's immediately what you associate to people, and I think that's unfair. And I also think like it's important to acknowledge the additional burdens that we carry. We've talked about that this entire call, right? And so when we talk about this pressure to perform, and that all of us, we're all about metrics, you know, we're all about numbers, we're all about the data, you know, show me what you're producing. And that's how we associate people's value to the work that they do or to the organization that they're a part of. And while metrics and data are important, I think there's there's work to be done to think of it more holistically. And again, to think about the value that people bring just simply based on their perspective and who they are and their experiences, and not always being laser focused on what can someone produce. And even remembering that, hey, look, the fact that I'm here every day in my shirt and tie or whatever, when just I turn on the TV every day and seeing somebody who looks like me shot dead in the streets. And so the fact that I even have the mental energy to come and engage in these spaces, I think that alone is a testament to my dedication and to my professionalism in itself. And so I think just like, you know, just do the work yourself and understand what Black people and Black men specifically are like the barriers that they're coming to the table with, and meet them halfway. And I think, you know, that's sort of that would be my advice for organizations that are thinking about how to better support people like us.
Awesome. I've got to tell you, I think that the resilience that is exhibited by showing up every day. You know, when you watched Ahmaud Arbery, the video of him being killed, to show up at work the next day is resilience to me, because I felt it. Frankly, I feel it now with all of the things that's happening in Philadelphia and other places. So Richmond, you've had some experience in corporate spaces as well as in the nonprofit sector, places where people are trying to give and produce for the good, and probably some spaces where you felt they were participating in a rather extractive economy. How can organizations and people be better for Black men, you know, based on your experience?
You know, well, first, I agree with everything that Kai and Ira shared. I agree wholeheartedly. You know, my first comment would be practice what you preach. You know, I think especially now there's this big push. Everyone's talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, but they're talking about it, but they haven't done anything about it. And when I say do something about it, I'm talking from an infrastructure standpoint, in terms of, have you created a diversity, equity, inclusion committee in your own organization? Because before you can help me change mine, you got to change yours first. Secondly, you know, admitting that systemic racism exists. We still have folks that say it doesn't exist. And guys, I'll give you a good example. So I had a colleague the other day tell me, he says, well, we're going to add this position for this person for this job, right? And I said, so what are their qualifications? Well, I'm not sure, but the leader wants to add this position. And I said, well, do you understand that's systemic racism? Because you've already made a decision to bring on and hire somebody and you haven't, and it wasn't providing an opportunity for all the other folks in this community who may have that similar experience or even better to apply for that job. That's systemic racism. They're thinking, well, because I know them. But again, that's systemic racism. Again, that's where you get folks such as us here on this call who don't get an opportunity to compete for that job because it was not made available, right? I'm gonna go back to what Kai says about recruiting, Black men, because I've heard it many a times that well, we can't find talented Black men. You know, my first comment is, well, you're looking at one, so you could start there. But there's many of talented Black men in our community, and I just think it's about expanding the talent pool that they're reaching out to. I go back to what Kai mentioned, is about learning about Black men and understanding there's no threat, understanding that we are an untapped resource in this community, especially here. I'd say here in South Mississippi, we have so many talented young Black men here that do not even get the chance to be able to apply and to be involved in the system. So, you know, I would say, Vaughn, in terms of funders, when you're funding, those should be elements that you're including in the funding mechanism, in terms of making sure that we have diverse workplaces, making sure that as we're serving those in this community, that we're serving, making sure we're serving a diverse community. And so I think that's where the funders can reinforce those things, not just, you know, as Black men, but just for other organizations that do not have a Black men leading organization to hold them accountable as well, is to have that momentum there. But then, you know, I'll end, Vaughn, is, you know, you're right. You know, in a lot of the situations I've been in, I've always, you know, I've been the only Black person there. And you know, for me, it's not fear. And for me, you know, it's about having that confidence that, you know what, I can do the things that are necessary to be successful in this space. But I tell you, I'm tired of that. I'm tired of being the only Black man in this space. I'm tired of hearing about the first Black, the first African American, the first this and the first, you know, I want to get us beyond that, and it becomes more of a commonplace than us saying the first, because we still say that too much. It's 2020, and we're still saying that I'm the first Black to do X. Why? That should not exist anymore. And for me, I want to get to a place where we're not talking about that. I want me to say, you know what? There's several other brothers who are in these positions. And it starts for me with Goodwill. We have 147 Goodwill agencies in the country. There's only 8 African-American CEOs in Goodwills. 8. 5 of us are Black men. And for most of you who don't really know about Goodwills, we typically are the largest agencies in a community, and typically have the, you know, have the more competitive compensation. But there's only 8 of us in the country, and I was the second African American to take a CEO position with Goodwill. There was a sister who's had it for several years. I was the second, and that is a shame, because if you look at the majority of the communities that we serve, they're African American. When I look at the commercials, I see Black folks. When I go on the website, I see that. Yet leadership didn't reflect those communities that we serve. So again, my call to action is just practice what you preach, make the commitment, understand that Black men are an asset to our respective communities, and provide those opportunities for employment and opportunities for them to give back to their communities. And to me, it starts with us and our organizations, because that's what we're here to do, is to improve our communities.
Awesome. Yeah. So we have we've got a few minutes here to take questions from the audience. I think because we could have folks bum rush the microphone. It would be awesome if y'all wouldn't mind, if you have a question, typing that question into the chat, and I'm going to try to both navigate chewing gum, looking at the camera, and also kind of vetting questions. I want to welcome Dave and Jessica, who I want to just give them a shout out for being so thorough and so accommodating and getting us ready to do this. So I want to welcome them in if they want to jump in as well. So there was a question at about 11:06 in our chat about, and I'll just read the first part of it. It says, sometimes advancing one's mission can benefit from working with individuals whose heritage or personal past contributed to the prevention of diversity through strategic or direct physical methods. Have you all faced these types of partnerships? and how have you managed them? I think, so one of the things germane to that question is just recognizing everybody's not on the same page with you, when you come in. And so you're sometimes having to force. Is he in? Z, are you able to kind of speak and clarify that question a little bit? Uh-oh. Ellen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
All right, I don't know about this technology. No, this is not Z. This is Dr. Stephen Farrell with Indori. And, not for any harm, but just looking at the landscape, you work with all types of people. And Mississippi has a history, as does Minnesota, as it does Detroit, as does South Carolina. And I think we're all trying to work to a better place where all of humanity can work for the elevation of humanity, absolutely. But out of ignorance or any other reason, historically, some people have not seen the light, and they've actually, gotten in the way of advancing society. When you run into people who might have that history as part of their heritage, or somebody who might have been directly involved in impeding that progress, maybe it's not appropriate for somebody like you to be at the table. How do you work with them to advance your organization? Because you can't always ignore them. I mean, they're in the space and everybody's making a decision together. So I'd like to be able to hear from the panelists on how to handle this in a constructive way, if they had that experience.
Has anyone had that experience that of the panelists that can speak to it? Dave, maybe this question is why you invited me to be the moderator at the Winter Institute. I've got a thought about it, but I definitely want to defer to the panelists on it. I will tell you, I've been fortunate both in working with nonprofits on boards, but also through working in communities with the Winter Institute. In Mississippi, a tremendous amount of the resources are still held by people who are old enough, have been in positions of leadership long enough to be considered party to the oppressive system. It kind of comes with the wallpaper here. In those situations, I think two things are important. One, that we show up with the courage of our convictions and why we are trying to do what we're trying to do, so that you can stand firm in that when people show up problematically. And the second thing, I think it's building allies. Sometimes you do need people. You need to build relationships with people who are able to help that person move down the continuum from being problematic to being a constructive, promising partner. And so, I think it can't be either or, right? Because some folks just won't deal with you. I mean, they may not say it explicitly, but your emails don't get returned as fast as other people in the conversation. And every now and then, people will go behind your back in initiatives and say, look, this is a lot of money. Perhaps a better place for it is here or there. So I also want to challenge those in the audience. Build relationships with Black leaders like these, and the stronger relationship you build with them, they're often able to tell you where they need you to help close a gap in order for them to serve their mission. I wish it were not that way, but I think it just is. There are enough examples of that for me to state pretty emphatically it's still happening, and that is a problem for a lot of folks. Anyone else want to respond to that before we jump to the next question?
Hey, Vaughn, this is Richmond. So
Yes.
thanks for the question, Stephen. Stephen's a sharp brother who's at, as he mentioned, Indori, and hopefully, in the chat pod, Stephen, if you don't mind sharing your information, because I think folks would really benefit from learning more about your organization that you represent here on the Gulf Coast. My example would be, I had to engage with conversation with Cindy Hyde-Smith's campaign or office. There, she said some things in the past that not good. And, and to me, reinforced that oppressive state I think represents Mississippi in a very poor fashion. But in order to move an issue forward that impacted this organization, I had to set aside my personal issues with her and the things she stands for to move us forward. And so, it's hard. It was hard then. It's still hard today, and it's happened. It was almost a year ago. But there are times when you do got to negotiate with yourself in order to move the organization forward. Because what I don't want to do is impact this organization in a negative way because of my personal, issues with a particular person or their office. And so that, Stephen, was very hard. It's still hard today, but it was in the best interest for this organization to move it forward for all of us, both our Black employees and also my white employees.
Ira, Kai, any thoughts on that?
If I could throw in.
Yes, go ahead.
If I could throw in one last thing, not that I've seen this yet, however, it's incumbent on any leader to be proactive and to anticipate roadblocks before they show up and to handle them constructively. So I really appreciate Richmond's perspective on that. That helps me going forward if and when I do run into something like that. So much obliged.
So the folks aren't jumping to the mic with other questions. That means we thoroughly put them to sleep, or we got them full. Ellen, you have a question for us? Please.
Okay, I was trying to unmute. First of all, I want to say thank you to all the gentlemen here today for sharing their experiences, and especially in their wisdom, and especially your vulnerabilities, because being a leader, as Ira pointed out, is very hard, and it takes a journey of just a lot of self-development to become better every day, and that's a vulnerability that you have to be willing to share. But my question to the leaders here, as you know, we are the Mississippi Alliance of Nonprofits and Philanthropy, and our job, our mission is to work together to better bridge the gaps between nonprofits and the philanthropic community. And I don't know if you all are familiar with a report that was recently released by the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy that talked about equitable funding in Black communities, and that they found that there's been a shortfall, should I say, of funding from some foundations in funding Black communities. And just to make it brief, I wanted to know from your experiences, because we all know running nonprofits, you got to have money to do so. Do you feel as well that there is a lack of equitable funding and access to philanthropic resources, and especially to Black communities, Black-led nonprofits as well? And if so, what would be your charge to us as the Alliance to help bridge those gaps in resources?
Yeah, I'll jump in because we're both a funder and a recipient of funds at United Way. I would say absolutely. I would say that we've been a part of that too, as United Way, both locally and as a network. This is a conversation we're having as United Ways, at 1,100 United Ways across the U.S. right now, is actually about how do we make sure that we're more equitable in the way that we invest and fund. To your point, Ellen, Black-led nonprofits, nonprofits in Black communities, nonprofits who are doing the work of equity in communities. I think number one, it starts with an internal, number one, it starts internally, right? And so for us as an organization, we're actually going through an equity journey ourselves. We're actually working with Vaughn's organization to do that, so that we have as a team, a common understanding of what equity means and how it relates to our work. And then we, at the same time, doing internal reflection on, okay, how have we contributed to any inequities that we're seeing in our community? How has our funding trickled down, and is it really having an impact on reducing disparities that we see? And then, we're going to be in the process of revamping our funding mechanism so that we're ensuring that, one, as a major component of receiving grant funding from us, you have to demonstrate how you're reducing these disparities and how you're reducing inequities in the community, particularly racial inequities. Because if you disaggregate data along almost any measure of health and well-being, you're going to find racial disparities. You're going to. And the issue becomes, if you're not closing those disparities, you're not really moving the needle on that issue, not nearly as far as you could. So that has to be internalized into the DNA of the organization that says, no, we're going to focus specifically on this. We're going to make our grantees demonstrate how they're impacting this. And, there are some United ways to actually make all of their grantees complete an equity audit before they're even eligible to apply for grants, right? And the equity audit can be as simple as, you looking at your organization, its practices and what you're doing, and you're able to determine and evaluate how equitable your internal practices are before you can even ask for external help. So that's why I would say it begins. But then also, if this is work that you haven't done before and you want to do it, then get an advisory body together to help you look at it. Of people outside the organization, of people who really don't necessarily have a dog in that fight, but work in that space, because they'll be able to shed some light on some things that we often don't see because we're so deep in the forest that we can't see the trees.
Richmond or Kyle, do you want to add to that response?
I'll go. Ellen, yes, there is, an inequity in the funding, and I believe a lot of it resides in just having access and knowing when funding is coming available, or knowing how to acquire the funding. And I'll use here on the Gulf Coast, we have the BP funds that there's a group here who evaluates projects and those different things. Well, if you're not connected, you won't know what projects are going to be funded. So you need to know, number one, who's making the decision and understand what their priorities are. Number two, what kind of project will get funded. And I've seen a lot of those projects not get funded because they didn't understand the criteria of that funding. So I think, one is the access, and I'll speak on behalf of Goodwill. One of the things that we have not done as well as I want to, and we will be doing, is us investing in organizations that are Black-led as well. And so we've now started a process where we have a roundup campaign in our stores, and then we're going to start granting them funds out to individuals in the community through our board. Our board's going to have a process, and then I think we're going to follow some of the same criteria that Ira mentioned in terms of making sure that organizations that we fund have go through an equity assessment or evaluation as part of their application for funding. So I think that's where we can help inject something from us directly into into some of the Black-led organizations, especially here on the coast.
Well, we are getting close to the time at which we have to respect your time. So I'm going to toss it back over to Dave. I would like to add just one point on the end of that. Ellen, Dave, Alliance team, one of the most amazing things I think you can do, and it's pretty basic, is create spaces for funders to hear about and hear from the communities and the leaders doing the work that they don't often hear from. This is a great example. This was just an amazing experience for me. I've learned so much from the panelists today, and I know that there's so many other identity groups out there that people don't, for different reasons, avail themselves to hearing from. So thank you all for being willing to do this. Dave, I'm going to toss it over to you to move us on.
Thank you, Vaughn, and thank you, everybody. I'm a bit at a loss for words, and so I'm not going to try and find the right words beyond thank you. When we were planning for this, one of the most critical components to making this structurally successful is authenticity, and Ellen's choice of words, vulnerability. We did not want and do not seek to have conversations at the roundtables that we host that are surface level. Your time is precious, the time of our panelists is precious, and we are here together to grow, and that requires a certain authenticity and vulnerability. And so I appreciate you all being willing to do that and allowing, as Kai said, to remember that I have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and to really focus on that listening. And as someone who is not a Black male leader, I think that's one of the things that I'm really trying to do, is to listen and to read and to watch and to make sure that I am doing my part to reflect on what I am seeing and look for spaces where I can be an advocate and be a partner in this. And so I appreciate you all allowing me to be part of this. And so again, thank you, Vaughn, Ira, Kai, and Richmond. This was profound and important, and I want to make sure that we share this out to people, because this is a conversation that needs to be not only heard, but had at a greater frequency. And so again, thank you to everybody in the room. Again, we appreciate you being here. To do a little bit of shameless self-promotion, which I apologize for, but that is the job of the program director. We do have ongoing trainings in November. We would love to see you. Lots of trainings, lots of events. And one of the ones that's actually coming up on the 10th, and that is relevant to this conversation somewhat, is a training on communication and conflict. It's a fantastic training being provided by the Institute of Southern Jewish Life and their Talk About the Problems program. And this is a training that focuses on impact statements and hearing other people and how to have difficult conversations and making sure that language is being used in an effective way. And so I highly recommend that you make some time, if you can, to attend. We'd love to have you. There are a limited number of seats. We do ask that at least 2 people from your organization attend. So we only have a room for about 8 organizations. So if you are interested, please reach out. We'd love to have you and really make sure that lessons learned around how to have tough conversations or difficult conversations, those skills are learned and shared, and because it's relevant and important in our work and growing. So again, thank you all. That's enough of the promotion on my side. If you need anything, we are here. We'd love to help you. Thank you, Jessica, my partner here at the programming, the Alliance, for helping to get this together. You all, please be safe, be well, and for all of you on the coast in particular today, please be safe and be well as we all work on this journey to make Mississippi great. Thank you all. Have a great day.